Hello everyone, I'm Ethys for those of you who don't know me, and welcome again to the Metaphysics of Eorzea. We are going to tackle a problem that I know has been plaguing many of us for a long time, and one which I have talked about in a few different places, but I was really just waiting for Heavensward to drop before I address it formally, so that I might account for each new instance without being unnecessarily speculative. If you haven't seen my video on the first principles of the Metaphysics of Hydaelyn, I would recommend checking that out quickly, as I will refer to some of the same ideas, but for now we are going to finally resolve a difficult question with a deceptively simple answer. What is a primal? Once we have done so, we'll assess each and every primal that we have so far encountered in Final Fantasy XIV to see how they fit into the definition and complicate or refine our understanding of this phenomenon. Firstly, I've talked already about how existence in Hydaelyn, as with most fantasy universes, occurs concurrently in parallel phenomenal and noumenal space. In our case, we have respectively the world and the ether, or life stream. I've posited that this ether actually constitutes a kind of veil between the world and the void, or Hydaelyn and Zodiac, but that is at this point still speculative. In any case, the building blocks of physical things on Hydaelyn are comprised of ether that has crystallized and taken various elemental aspects. You might think of crystal dust as the Eorzean atom. All of these natural physical things are made up of the world, of the crystallized ether of Hydaelyn. There is, however, another aspect to conscious being, which we describe as the essence or soul, which is a coalescence of pure or noumenal ether native to the life stream, which may reside within or without a physical body, but without one will usually dissipate across the stream after a short time. Now, just as the hands might build sculptures from the physical world, so too does the will mold ether. Ether is without mass, but not without potential energy, and so it can be channeled from the life stream or from ether-rich objects such as a crystal, a tree, or one's own body, with sufficient willpower into an expression of elemental or non-elemental energy. This is the core principle of all disciplines of magic. With a large enough exertion of will, something ordinarily possible only to a great number of minds focused on a single point, it is possible to do two remarkable things. The first is to cause an ethereal coalescence, if you will, the immaculate conception of an unnatural soul. This is the essence of a primal. The second is to cause the crystallization of ether, to essentially convert energy to matter, thus giving a form for this essence to inhabit. The primal is in this way born, but its physical form will immediately begin to degrade, as it is more or less a spell being sustained and not a natural body. So to perpetuate itself, the primal needs both the consumer source of ether as fuel for its body, and a legion of worshippers to keep its essence intact through will or prayer. If the primal is to feed on a store of ether of a greater quantity and rate than that at which it degrades, it will have more to burn in performing actions. Thus does a greater cache of ether-rich crystals give a primal greater power. Similarly, the greater number of worshippers willing the coalescence of the primal's essence, the more readily the ether comprising its essence will remain intact beyond the destruction of its body, and the greater ease it will have returning once again. It is through an instinct for self-preservation, then, that primals temper mortals. The first primals we encountered followed these principles in a very straightforward manner. The Ascians appealed to the beast tribe's preconceived notions of their respective deities and whipped them into enough of an aggressive fervor that the motivations behind their worship were inherently violent. Ether crystals were abundant throughout Eorzea as a result of the falling Agrius breaking the seal upon the fount of ether at Silvertear, so it was not difficult for the tribes to collect sufficient ether to give form and sustain these simulacrums of their heroes, benefactors, or deities. Ifrit, Titan, Garuda, and Leviathan were all rendered in this same manner, and Ramu was only different insofar as the Sylphs were naturally disinclined to violence, and so their primal followed suit, only stirring to act over increasing encroachments into the Sylph territories. It is worth noting here that in order for the primal to take form, the image in the worshippers' minds must be consistent. It is for this reason that the Ascians appeal to myths and legends that have already been established in each culture. And many, if not all of these legends, are historically based on some real creature or person. The most obvious example is the way the Primal Shiva is produced from the ideas of the historical saint of the same name. And Bahamut is a very similar situation, but if we accept that every idea in myth or theology must needs be referential, we can make some educated guesses about the origins of many of the other primals. Adventurers travelling to Limsa Lominsa before the Calamity had a close call with an immense sea serpent, one of the same species as Taleos and Perikos of Vilbrand myth, but also near identical in appearance to the Sahagins' lord Leviathan. It is not difficult to imagine that encounters with this primordial monster would have inspired such awe in the Sahagins that it passed into legend as a tempestuous god of the seas. And so the summoned Leviathan takes the image in the mind's eye of his faithful as a great serpent, and the violent character that has inspired them to call for his deliverance. Ramu takes the appearance of an Elezen sage, which is curious for the guarded sylphs. It seems likely that this sylphic legend developed from the first Elezen that crawled from Galmora and formed the Green Pact with the elementals, found in Gridania, quelling the fury of the forest and protecting the Twelve's wood from any that would do it and its denizens harm. There must have been some of these first Gridanians that were known to the sylphs as great sentinels of the forest. We might well count the historical figure upon which the primal Ramu is based to be among these. The untempered Ixali have a kind of creation myth where their goddess Garuda cast them from the heavenly Aatlan and took from them their wings that they might be fully reliant on her favour. Our recent expeditions through Azus La have, however, offered us some compelling contrary evidence. The fractal continuum has preserved several specimens of these clearly winged Ixal, Ixalion, the Allegans called them, and the continuum describes them as chimeric creations of ancient Alleg for the purpose of manual maintenance and labour. Garuda, then, may well have been a revolutionary among these ancient Ixal, orchestrating a rebellion and escape from their Allegan taskmasters and an exodus towards Girabanya, generations after which the Ixal had adapted beyond their need for winged extremities in the same manner as the Mericidian Koel dragon. The Mughals of the Twelve's Wood have a similar story of escaping from the churning mists when the Twelve became divinely grumpy, probably at the start of the First Umbral era, by means of a great rope woven by the good king Mogul Mog XII. Shiva we have already mentioned, and the Primal Bahamut was created when the Ascians coerced the grieving Tiamat into a ritual that might resurrect her mate, but instead birthed a monster with his shape and name. The great worm Bahamut and the Primal Bahamut are completely separate entities. Titan and Ifrit are likely products of similar conditions, although I don't believe we have quite enough information to build precise theories, and of Belias we know almost nothing, but I have speculated about him in a previous video, and I'll place an annotation for that at the end. This leaves us with the less straightforward instances of primal summoning. Enkidu is produced by a single mind, that of Gilgamesh, so desperately yearning for his friend that his single prayer is the equivalent of many, and the small crystal stash in his possession allows for the birth of a pitifully fragile and short-lived primal. The Ascians inspired an attempt by some refugees of Little Alamigo to steal enough crystals from the Amaljar to summon a simulacrum of Ralga in the form of a primal, and this may well have eventually succeeded without our intervention. Thus must we guard against our own faith in the 12 and the way it might be manipulated against us by the forces of darkness. The Archbishop Thordan VII of the Holy See realized that the millennia-long reverence of his ancestor King Thordan and his Knights 12 had resulted in incredibly powerful ethereal coalescence, and that each of these figures had long been potential primals, waiting only for the rituals that might spawn them. As for the question of ether, the Eye of Nidhogg, as that of any dragon, acts as a natural ethereal battery similar to Dalamud or the Tulsimati, steadily and perpetually drawing ether into itself, and in the case of Nidhogg's eye, this vessel had been growing in power for nearly as long as time itself. The wellspring of ether available to Thordan was then an incomparable magnitude above that of any previous primal, likely to even be beyond that of Bahamut. The Archbishop's confidence that he had become invincible was well deserved. Ravana and Bismarck do not seem so different in ontology to the primals of the other beast tribes. Both the Nath and the Vanu refer to figures of legend upon which the images of their primals are based, but they do raise the question of elemental orientation. Unukalhai tells us that being aligned to two different elements allows them to consume ether of both aspects more efficiently, but Thornton gives us a contrary demonstration when he consumes Lahabre and assures us that a primal can feed on any kind of ether no matter the source. Unukalhai also tells us that he doubts the Asians are responsible for the appearance of these two, but I don't think we have good cause to take the strange child's word for anything at this juncture. When Archon Le Veilleur attempted to reseal Bahamut, it was commonly believed that he was summoning manifestations of the 12. The important distinction, however, is that he did not call for prayer for a divine being, as the Asians would have hoped, but a divine intervention. The result was not a primal in their image then, but a spell that drew upon the powerful essence formed by these prayers, an essence which simulated those of the 12. We've already learned that the Tupsamati provided the placeholder for a mountain of crystals, being an ethereal battery and conduit in a similar manner to a dragon's eye. We also know that this spell failed, and that the immense quantity of ether that the Tupsamati had unleashed was left unresolved. The focus of the witnesses and combatants was firmly fixed upon Louis Soir in this moment, and their desperation only escalated. Thus did this ether reflect back towards him, and he found himself host to a primal of terrible power, the immortal Phoenix. Then there is perhaps the most enigmatic of all known primals, the dark divinity Odin. The fact that upon every defeat the rider dissolves, but the blade Zantetsuken remains has led many to the theory that it is the blade itself which is the primal, and not in fact the knight that we refer to as Odin. It seems that the blade tempers each warrior that defeats it, providing it with a source of both prayer and ether. This explains the comparatively weak instances of the primal that we have so far encountered, but each champion that defeats Odin must transcend the power of the current wielder, and thus the primal slowly and steadily becomes more powerful over time. The Echo, of course, provides a barrier against Zantetsuken's tempering, and so it is unable to possess any body of superhuman ability. None of this explains the origins of the primal, however, which I believe to be something quite unique. We are familiar with the method by which arms and armor might become ethereal, by bonding closely with the wielder and having him or her die in so wielding, by which the artifacts might sponge a portion of his or her dissolving essence. Our zodiac relics perform in an inverse way, having been altered so that they might absorb ether from creatures and champions that they kill. And through our bonding with the weapon, this ether slowly and steadily coalesces into a kind of sentient essence or living soul. From this precedent, we might form a fairly sound hypothesis. An ancient hero defeats the primal Odin of the long-forgotten people with a weapon, Zantetsuken, of the same kind of make and constitution as those of the Zodiac Braves, and draws the entire essence of the primal into the blade, rather than some small residue, with a ritual akin to our use of white auracite or of the Allagan's use of the Ultima weapon. The primal remains cognizant. Through this transition, the blade has effectively become its new body, and it quickly tempers the champion to its own will. The worship of the tempered wielder perpetuates the primal's essence long after its original servants are lost to history, and it draws upon both the ether of the wielder's body and of that absorbed from the blade's kills. This theory also effectively accounts for the motivation of the primal, constantly searching for a worthy foe that it might come to possess and steadily increase its own strength. When it is defeated by the Warrior of Light, however, it is unable to temper the victor and is forced to settle for something less, one of the Gridanians that recovered the blade. All that remain of the known primals then are Alexander and the Warring Triad, the Goddess, the Demon, and the Fiend. Originally named by Tetsuya Nomura in his concept art for Final Fantasy VI as respectively Sophia, Zavan, and Sephiroth. Of these three, we know almost nothing. We might posit, based on their appearance in Final Fantasy VI, however, that their summoning and subsequent conflict was the cause of the Third Umbral Era, and that it was their binding by the young Allagan civilization which ushered in the Third Astral Era, and paved the way for the development of their mighty empire. We should discover soon enough whether or not this is the case, but for now that is my own working theory. Finally, Alexander still leaves us with many unanswered questions at this point. Without spoiling this new story arc for anyone, we know that someone tried to summon him 3 years ago, which resulted in the land splitting open and revealing the ruins we saw in the Thaliarch beforehand, as well as producing the Ethys shield, which now covers a good portion of the central hinterlands. Maid tells us of the Enigma Codex, a century-old Technophile's almanac holding designs for many wonders, including a mechanical, mobile, and self-sustaining citadel, Alexander. The Illuminati goblins have evidently studied these designs through and through, to the point where they have such a strong and consistent idea of the construct that they have been able to summon a primal of the same specifications. And so we find that a primal does not even have to be organic. If it can be dreamt and idolized, it can be given form. Like all primals, however, its self-fueling is not sustainable, and its size and complexity requires so much more power than other primals that it is drawing ether not only from crystals but from every mote of land and air around it. Once active, Y'shtola has no doubt that it will bleed Hydaelyn dry in a matter of months. I do hope that I've answered more questions than I've raised here and quelled at least some of the vagueness or uncertainty regarding the primal phenomenon, but I know there are still some points left unanswered for now. What, for instance, is the difference, if there is a difference, between a primal and the elegant distinction of icon? Does it demarcate ancient primals from modern, elemental from non-elemental, Ascian-driven from man-driven? And speaking of elements, how is it that primals take an elemental aspect? Has it something to do with an elemental association in the ideas of the worshippers? Or is it anchored to the aspect of the crystals with which they originally summoned? These are thoughts which I think we should continue to process, and as always, I would love to hear your thoughts, whether they are consistent or contradictory to mine. It's all about the discourse. But for now, I am Ethys. Thank you so much for watching, and comment, like, and subscribe for more.